In the heart of a bustling Ohio town, the county animal shelter buzzed with activity. Volunteers hustled from cage to cage, calling names, refilling water bowls, and wiping down enclosures. Families milled about, some laughing, some scrolling on their phones, some whispering about which puppy would fit best into their lives. Amid the chaos, cage number 27 sat at the far end of the row, tucked against a wall where the sunlight barely reached. Inside, a large mixed-breed dog with brindle fur and scarred ears lounged quietly, eyes half closed, chest rising and falling with slow, deliberate breaths. The shelter staff had a name for him, Buddy, but very few visitors ever knew it. His intake file was a long string of discouraging notes. Returned 3 times, nervous around loud noises, exhibits withdrawal, unknown history, not recommended for families with children. Each bullet point seemed to weigh him down, layering invisible chains of rejection. Lisa, one of the longtime volunteers, would glance at him often and whisper, "You're too good for this world, buddy. Someone will see you soon." But no one ever did. The families walked past, clutching tiny dogs with wagging tails, cooing over kittens tumbling in small piles of hay. Children pressed their faces to glass enclosures, pointing and squealing, only to turn away when they passed Buddy's cage. He didn't bark or whine for attention. He didn't throw himself at the bars. He simply watched, alert yet resigned, with an expression that seemed almost human, almost painfully aware that he was invisible. His paws, large and calloused, rested on the cold concrete floor, and a thin layer of dust clung to his fur. Months in the shelter had stripped away the shine, leaving only survival, quiet and watchful. Volunteers who had known him the longest recalled the first day he arrived. He had been found wandering an abandoned construction site, emaciated and limping from a healed but not healed injury to his hind leg. A passerby had called animal control, who brought him in. When they checked his collar, it was cracked and faded, the tag barely legible. No microchip, no history, just a name scratched faintly, Buddy. Over the months, Buddy had developed a routine. Every morning, Lisa would appear, crouch by his cage, and talk to him. "Good morning, Buddy. Another day, huh?" He would tilt his head but rarely respond, as if acknowledging the words but not the world. Lunches were the same. Volunteers would bring him food, but he often ate slowly, chewing with care, wary of sudden movements. At night, when the shelter emptied, he would curl in the corner of his cage, listening to the faint hum of the street outside, a world he longed to be part of but never dared enter. Despite all this, Buddy had a dignity that could not be broken. Other dogs barked frantically for attention, climbed their cages, or leapt at visitors, but he remained poised, eyes tracking movements, body relaxed yet ready. He seemed to carry memories too heavy for anyone to imagine. Lisa often caught herself thinking, he's seen things no one should see. He survived, but at what cost? But today was different. Today there was an edge in the air, a quiet tension that no one could explain. The shelter was preparing its weekly euthanasia list, a necessary evil in a world where resources were limited. Cage 27 had been on the edge for weeks. Buddy's calm demeanor, once mistaken for patience, had become a liability. Volunteers whispered among themselves, "He's too old, too cautious, too broken." Buddy lay on the concrete floor, head resting on his massive paws, watching a family pass by. The little girl in the group peered curiously into his cage, pressing her hands against the glass. "Mom, why doesn't he play like the other dogs?" she asked, her voice soft, almost scared. The mother smiled nervously. "Honey, maybe he's just shy." The girl lingered for a moment, her eyes meeting Buddy's, sensing an unspoken story. Then, distracted by a puppy squeaking in the next row, she turned and left. The shelter doors clanged as more people arrived, the scent of coffee and winter coats mixing with the faint odor of disinfectant. Buddy's ears twitched at every sound, but he did not move. His gaze settled instead on the small, faded tag still hanging from his collar. No one had noticed it for months. The metal was dull, scratched, and almost unrecognizable. Most would see it as just another relic of a dog's forgotten life, a tag to identify a pet that no one wanted. But there was something about it, something waiting to be seen. Lisa knelt by the cage, scratching behind his ears. "Another day, buddy," she whispered. He leaned into her hand slightly, a gesture so subtle it could be missed. "I don't know how much longer you've got," she murmured, her voice catching. She glanced around. The shelter was a blur of activity. Volunteers were busy with paperwork, families haggling over kittens, and the back office was a whirlwind of scheduling. Buddy, as usual, was invisible. As the clock ticked toward closing, the atmosphere in the shelter grew heavy. Buddy had been there for 8 months. He had survived cold floors, loud noises, the chaos of children and dogs alike, and countless rejections. His body was strong, but his spirit had endured a quiet erosion. Yet in his eyes there remained a spark, a glimmer of hope that refused to die. Then a quiet voice broke through the hum of the shelter. It was the manager speaking over the intercom. "Reminder, euthanasia schedule review tomorrow. Make sure all files are up to date." The words hung in the air like a guillotine. Volunteers exchanged uneasy glances. Some murmured apologies to the dogs they knew were on the list. Buddy lifted his head slightly, ears twitching. He didn't understand death as humans did, but he felt its presence, a silent threat that made the air heavy. Lisa gave him one last scratch behind the ears and whispered, "Hang in there, buddy. Someone will see you, I promise." But as she stood and walked away, she felt the weight of despair pressing down. No one had noticed the tag today, and if no one did, Buddy's time might run out. The tag, small, faded, almost meaningless to the casual eye, was the one clue that could change everything. It was his only chance, yet it lay hidden in plain sight. As evening fell, the shelter quieted. Families had left, volunteers were cleaning up, and Buddy lay in the corner, chest rising and falling steadily. His eyes tracked shadows, his ears catching every creak of the building. Outside, the wind rattled a loose shutter, making a soft metallic clink, like the whisper of destiny itself. No one saw it, but Buddy's gaze fixed on the glint of the tag, reflecting the dim overhead light. In that moment, the world outside and the world inside the cage seemed to hold their breath. Tomorrow could be his last day. Tomorrow, everything could change, or everything could end. And in the silence, the dog who no one wanted waited, unaware that his life's turning point was closer than he could ever imagine. Because someone who wasn't even looking for him, was about to notice the tag, and nothing would ever be the same again. Saturday dawned gray and cold over the Ohio town, the kind of morning that made the streets glisten with leftover frost from the night before. At the county animal shelter, the hum of fluorescent lights and the distant barking of dogs created a rhythm that volunteers had long accepted as normal. But for Buddy, it was another day in a world that had never wanted him. He lay in the corner of cage 27, muscles tense, eyes alert, yet resigned. 8 months had taught him to observe without hope, to notice every movement while expecting nothing in return. Lisa arrived early, her coat zipped up, scarf wrapped tightly around her neck. She carried a bag of towels and blankets, her hands shaking slightly as she crossed the floor. "Morning, Buddy," she said softly, kneeling at the edge of his cage. His ears flicked, and he raised his head briefly, but he did not move closer. He had learned that human words were fleeting promises, too often broken. Lisa's heart ached. She could feel the weight of the upcoming euthanasia schedule pressing on her, a shadow looming over the dogs who had no voices to plead for themselves. The other dogs in the shelter were already awake and restless. Puppies yipped and leapt at visitors, small adult dogs barked for attention, and a pair of cats in a side room hissed at the world beyond their enclosure. But Buddy remained still, the calm center of a chaotic storm. Occasionally, a child would peek into his cage, pause, then move on. He had long ago stopped expecting their fascination or pity. The world had shown him rejection enough to last several lifetimes. By mid-morning, the shelter began to fill with the usual weekend visitors. Families wandered the rows of cages, asking questions, touching noses through glass, or holding up puppies to see if they were the right fit. Some volunteers guided them toward kittens, some toward energetic dogs that wagged furiously and barked endlessly. Cage 27 remained overlooked, as always. Buddy's eyes followed a small boy dragging a reluctant mother past his cage. The boy stopped briefly, peering at him, curiosity lighting up his face, but the mother tugged him away. "Not that one, honey, too different." Buddy's ears twitched, a faint tilt of the head that seemed almost questioning, almost sad. Lisa tried to make light conversation with a volunteer, but her eyes constantly flicked back to Buddy. "I swear," she muttered, "if no one sees him today," her voice trailed off. She wasn't sure what she feared more, the frustration of another day ignored or the finality of the euthanasia list looming tomorrow. The note in the file, pinned in bright red letters, scheduled for Monday. Those words haunted her. She had been with him through every return, every fearful visitor, every silent moment of waiting. 8 months in a cage had worn down every other dog, but Buddy carried a quiet resilience that she admired. As the morning passed, Buddy's attention shifted to a small, worn tag hanging from his cracked leather collar. It caught the weak morning light, glinting faintly, almost invisible among the scratches and dullness of age. Volunteers rarely noticed it. They assumed it was old, meaningless, perhaps a relic of a previous life no one cared to remember. But Lisa had always wondered about it. One side of the tag was slightly bent, the engraving almost rubbed away. Yet in her heart she felt it held a story. She reached down, brushing the tag with her fingers through the cage bars, but stopped herself. Rules forbade it. Only potential adopters could handle the dogs. Around midday, a man entered the shelter. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with a calm, measured stride that set him apart from the typical family visitors. He wore a simple jacket and carried no leash or carrier, only a small bag that looked ordinary but heavy in a purposeful way. Daniel Harper had not been to the shelter in years, decades actually, but today had drawn him in for reasons he could not fully explain. He wasn't there for a dog. He wasn't even considering adoption. His life had changed violently in the past year. A widow at 46, he had retired early from the fire department after decades of service, haunted by memories and trying to fulfill a promise to his late wife, to do something meaningful every day. Today, that something happened to be donating old blankets. Daniel moved through the rows of cages with a detached courtesy, nodding politely to the volunteers. He paused at the energetic puppies, glanced at the yapping adults, then continued. His eyes, however, were drawn to cage 27, not by the chaos of the others, but by the calm stillness inside it. Buddy sat up, ears perked, eyes locked on Daniel immediately. Something in the way the man moved, in the shape of his stance and the weight of his gaze, seemed familiar. The dog's body tensed slightly, tail twitching, a silent recognition he did not yet understand. Daniel crouched down at eye level with Buddy, instinctively drawn to the large, scarred dog. He noticed the tag first, faint glinting in the overhead light. Curiosity overtook him. The tag, though scratched and worn, held engraved letters he could just barely make out. He leaned closer. "What do we have here?" he murmured. His fingers brushed the edge of the tag through the cage bars. For a brief moment, the world outside the shelter seemed to fade away. Buddy's eyes widened slightly, ears tilting forward, as if he recognized something, someone from a life long ago. Air in the shelter felt charged. Volunteers paused, noticing the unusual connection forming. Buddy, usually so reserved, now stood, tail low but stiff, body leaning slightly toward the man. Daniel, still crouched, traced the letters on the tag. He blinked hard. The engraving was faint, but the words began to form a pattern he could not ignore. "Search and Rescue, Station 14. If found, call." His heart skipped a beat. Station 14 was the old firehouse, his old unit, his old team. A name whispered in memory surged forward. Names of calls, disasters, and the K9 units that had worked beside him. Buddy took a tentative step toward the cage door, a cautious movement unlike any he had made for months. Daniel whispered, almost under his breath, "Buddy." The dog's body stiffened. For a heartbeat, everything froze. The barking of other dogs, the shuffle of feet, even the distant hum of traffic seemed to vanish. The air between them was electric, filled with an unspoken history that neither words nor time could erase. Lisa, standing nearby, gasped softly. She had never seen Buddy react this way, never with such recognition, never with such raw emotion. The cage seemed to shrink, the two of them, man and dog, locked in a moment that stretched longer than minutes. For Daniel, memories surged violently. Smoke-filled rooms, the heat of collapsed buildings, the cries of people trapped and lost, and the K-9 team that had saved so many lives and one that had disappeared that day. Buddy's ears flicked again. His tail lifted slightly, almost imperceptibly. He pressed forward another inch, sniffing the man's hand through the cage bars. Daniel's fingers closed lightly over the dog's paw, a connection that bypassed words entirely. He whispered the name again, louder this time, almost as if saying it would summon a forgotten truth. "Buddy, it's me." For a moment Buddy froze. Then slowly, with careful, deliberate steps, he leaned fully against the man's hand, resting his head lightly on Daniel's knee. It was the first time in months, maybe years, that he had reached out in trust. The shelter air seemed to hum with the significance of the moment. Volunteers stared, some blinking back tears, unsure if they were witnessing recognition, fate, or something larger than both. Daniel's breath caught in his throat. The tag, the scarred ears, the posture, the recognition, it all added up. Could it be? Could Buddy, the dog no one wanted, the one on the brink of being erased from the world, really be the K-9 partner he had lost years ago? The thought hit him like a lightning strike. He sank to the floor, arms open, waiting for confirmation. Buddy pressed closer, his warm, worn body trembling slightly, tail wagging faintly, as if answering a question Daniel had not yet spoken. Lisa finally spoke, voice trembling. "Mr. Harper, if you think—" She couldn't finish. Everyone else was watching in awe. Buddy's eyes were full of recognition, of trust, of the quiet relief of finally being understood. And yet the cage still stood between them, the shelter rules still looming, the uncertain future of adoption waiting in the wings. As the afternoon stretched on, the world outside the cage continued without pause, but inside, a different reality had begun. Buddy had been ignored, rejected, and overlooked for months, but the glint of the tag, now unmistakable, had drawn someone in, a man who wasn't even looking for him. And for the first time, the possibility of salvation existed. And yet, just as Daniel reached to unlock the cage door, a volunteer's voice called sharply from across the room. "Wait, you can't just—" The words cut off as the phone on the counter rang urgently, echoing through the shelter. Both Daniel and Buddy froze. Something was coming, something that could either confirm the miracle or shatter it before it could even begin. The tag glimmered faintly in the dim afternoon light, promising a story yet to be revealed, a past waiting to be uncovered. And in that moment, as the phone continued to ring and Buddy leaned closer to Daniel, the entire shelter seemed to hold its breath, poised on the edge of discovery. The ringing phone pierced the shelter's quiet tension like a siren, bouncing off concrete floors and steel cages. Daniel froze, still crouched beside Buddy, the dog's warm body pressing against his leg. Buddy's eyes darted toward the source of the sound, ears swiveling nervously, as if sensing that this interruption carried weight beyond ordinary routine. Volunteers scrambled to answer it, moving with a mix of urgency and apprehension. Daniel's hand stayed on Buddy's head, grounding them both, silently promising the dog that he was not alone anymore. Daniel wasn't supposed to be here. He hadn't planned to come near the adoption cages, hadn't planned to encounter a dog that would upend months of grief he hadn't known he was carrying. For weeks, he had wandered through life in a haze of half-formed routines. Coffee in the morning, empty apartment at night, memories of his late wife haunting the corners of every room. Today had been about blankets, old uniforms, comforters, towels, small gestures to fill the void left behind. Nothing more. Yet as Buddy leaned into him, tail flicking, eyes shimmering with recognition, Daniel felt a crack in his carefully constructed emotional armor. The tag, old and worn, had drawn him here. But more than the tag, it was the spark in the dog's eyes, a spark that spoke across years of separation and trauma. Daniel's chest tightened. Every instinct honed over decades in firehouses, emergency scenes, and dangerous calls screamed a truth he had tried to bury. This dog wasn't just another lost animal. He traced his fingers along the edges of the tag again, squinting to read the nearly eroded letters. Search and rescue Station 14. If found, call. Daniel's mind raced. Station 14 had been his unit. His heart beat faster. Memories surged in a wave. Smoke-choked corridors, the shattering sound of collapsing timber, the chaos of trapped victims, and the K-9 partner he had lost during a devastating building collapse years ago. Buddy. That had been the dog's name. That had been the dog's life entwined with his own, gone in an instant, or so everyone had believed. Buddy, Daniel whispered again, testing the word on his tongue. The dog's ears flicked sharply. A low whine escaped his throat. His body leaned forward cautiously but deliberately, as if he understood every syllable, every inflection. Daniel swallowed hard, the taste of adrenaline sharp on his tongue. Could it really be? Could this dog, scarred, broken, abandoned, really be the one he had mourned as lost forever? Lisa, standing nearby, watched in awe. She had seen dogs connect with people before, yes, but never like this. There was an electric charge in the air, a palpable pull that seemed to bend reality. She whispered, barely audible, "It's him, isn't it?" Daniel didn't answer. He couldn't. His focus was entirely on Buddy, whose trembling body betrayed the emotions he could not voice. Recognition, fear, hope, and longing collided in every subtle movement of the dog's head, every flick of his tail. The shelter was alive with background noise, phones ringing, volunteers calling names, dogs barking, but Daniel felt detached, as if he existed in a bubble carved just for the two of them. He lowered his head, bringing his face closer to Buddy, letting the dog sniff and feel the warmth of a familiar presence. The dog pressed forward, resting his massive head on Daniel's knee. Tears blurred Daniel's vision. He swallowed hard and whispered, voice breaking, "You're alive, you made it. All this time you made it." Buddy leaned closer, letting out a soft, trembling whine, and Daniel's heart shattered and rebuilt itself simultaneously. For a long minute, neither moved. Time seemed suspended. Then suddenly the shelter doors opened with a sharp clang and a family burst in looking for a kitten. Startled, Buddy's ears twitched. He pulled back slightly, uncertainty flickering in his eyes. Daniel instinctively wrapped an arm around him, murmuring reassurance. "It's okay, Buddy, I'm here. I'm not going anywhere." The dog relaxed a fraction, leaning into Daniel's hand once more. Daniel's mind raced. He remembered the night the building had collapsed years ago. Buddy had been by his side through every dangerous maneuver. They had navigated burning corridors together, Buddy's nose detecting victims trapped under debris, his body a shield when floors threatened to give way. And then, in the chaos, Buddy had vanished. Daniel had searched desperately, calling his name, praying he was safe, but the rubble was too vast, too unforgiving. He had left the site heartbroken, and Buddy had been assumed dead. Every holiday, every family gathering, every quiet night alone, Daniel had remembered that absence. And now here he was, alive, real, in front of him. So finally stepped closer. "Mr. Harper, I think you should read the file. There's more information. About his history, about the previous incidents, about—" She stopped, uncertain. The weight of what she was about to say could shatter or solidify the miracle unfolding. Daniel nodded, barely hearing her words, his eyes never leaving Buddy. He reached for the dog's intake file, flipping through the worn pages. Notes of return visits, not good with children, temperamental, anxious with loud noises. But then his hands froze on a page marked with a faint stamp. Search and Rescue K-9 Unit, Station 14. The confirmation hit him like a freight train. The markings, the scars, the old tag, the posture, the unspoken recognition, all of it pointed to one truth. This was Buddy. His Buddy. The dog he had mourned for years, the dog who had saved lives and been lost to chaos. The reality was almost too much to bear. His knees buckled slightly as he sat on the concrete floor, bringing Buddy fully into his arms. The dog's body trembled, pressed tightly against him, soaking up the warmth and safety he had longed for all this time. Volunteers gathered around, whispering among themselves. Phones were out, snapping photos, recording video, capturing a moment so profound it seemed unreal. Buddy, once invisible, rejected, overlooked, was now the center of a story that no one could ignore. Daniel stroked the dog's ears, murmuring, "You survived. You really survived." Buddy's whine softened into a sigh of relief, and he nuzzled closer. Yet the moment was not without tension. Though Daniel had recognized Buddy, the shelter still had rules. Buddy had an incident on record, a misreported bite that had kept him off adoption lists. Officially, he wasn't cleared for private adoption yet. Policies required review, possibly weeks of waiting. Daniel's heart ached at the thought. He knew the dog had suffered enough, months of rejection, trauma, isolation. Could the system allow them to reunite fully, or would red tape intervene, separating them once more? Daniel's fingers lingered on the tag, tracing the worn edges. Every scratch, every dent, every smudge told a story. He whispered again, "I'm not letting them take you away from me, Buddy. Not again." Buddy's eyes reflected the faint glimmer of hope, the fragile, tentative hope of a creature who had been abandoned by the world too many times. The phone rang again, sharper this time, cutting through the fragile bubble of reunion. A volunteer answered quickly, listening intently, then handed the receiver to the manager. Daniel glanced at Buddy. The dog stiffened, ears twitching, eyes alert. Something on the other end of the line was important, urgent. The shelter seemed to hold its collective breath. Daniel's pulse quickened. Was this confirmation of Buddy's past, or a bureaucratic obstacle that might tear them apart before they could escape together? Buddy let out a low, cautious whine, pressing against Daniel as if sensing the weight of the moment. The room felt suspended, the ordinary world fading into insignificance. Volunteers and staff exchanged glances. No one spoke. Everyone knew that what was unfolding was more than a coincidence. It was fate or something nearly identical to it. And yet the phone continued to ring, its shrill tone a reminder that the next moment could bring clarity or devastation. Daniel's heart pounded. His breath came in shallow bursts. He wrapped his arms tighter around Buddy, holding him close. "We'll figure it out," he whispered. "Whatever it takes, we'll figure it out." Buddy's ears flicked once, eyes glistening, a soft exhale escaping his muzzle. He had waited months, maybe years, for this recognition, this touch, this connection. And now, with a man he remembered with unshakable certainty, everything was poised on the edge of revelation. As the manager finally picked up the phone, Daniel's hand stayed on Buddy's collar. That small, faded tag, the key to everything, glinted in the dim light. In that instant, Daniel understood. Whatever came next, whatever obstacle the shelter or the world placed before them, they would face it together. And for the first time in nearly a decade, both man and dog dared to hope. But the voice on the other end of the line was calm, measured, yet heavy with news. Daniel stiffened. Buddy's body tensed. A name was spoken that made Daniel's blood run cold, a detail that no one in the shelter could have anticipated. And in that instant, the story of rejection, survival, and reunion took an unexpected turn, one that would either cement their bond forever or threaten to separate them just as the universe had brought them back together. The room was silent, except for the soft whine of Buddy and the relentless ticking of fate. Daniel held his breath as the manager spoke softly into the phone. Buddy, usually calm and composed, pressed closer against him, sensing the gravity of the conversation. Every muscle in the dog's body was taut, ears swiveling like radar dishes, eyes focused entirely on Daniel. He had survived months of rejection, months of neglect, and now, in this fluorescent-lit shelter, he seemed to sense that the next few moments could change everything. The words on the tag were simple, but their meaning was monumental. "Search and rescue Station 14. If found, call." Daniel traced the faded letters with trembling fingers, feeling the tiny grooves under his fingertips. Station 14. It was impossible. Every memory he had buried for years, the collapse, the smoke, the screams, the chaos of trapped civilians, flooded back with violent clarity. And there was Buddy, the dog he had mourned as lost forever, alive and trembling beneath his hands. He whispered the name again, almost afraid to hear it, almost afraid it wasn't real. "Buddy." The dog stiffened for a heartbeat, then took a cautious step forward, pressing his muzzle against Daniel's chest. The recognition in Buddy's eyes was unmistakable. It was as if decades of separation had collapsed into this single, taut moment. Daniel's throat tightened. He could feel the warmth of the dog's breath, the dampness of months of survival, the softness beneath the hardened exterior. This wasn't just a dog. This was his partner, his friend, his survivor. Volunteers and visitors stared in stunned silence. They had seen dogs reunited with owners, yes, but nothing like this. The tension in the air was almost palpable. Buddy had been passed from shelter to shelter, labeled aggressive, unfit, unadoptable. He had been judged, feared, and returned again and again. Yet now he stood trembling but alert, entirely focused on the man who had once risked his life alongside him. Lisa, her eyes misty, handed Daniel the intake file. "Everything we have is in here," she said softly. "The tag, we didn't know it mattered until you came." Daniel flipped the pages carefully. He scanned the notes, returned for behavioral issues, snap incidents, fear of loud noises, general anxiety. But then he reached a page stamped with a barely legible mark. K9 partner, Station 14. Last call assignment, rescue collapsed building. Dog lost in incident, presumed deceased. Daniel's chest tightened. Buddy had survived the collapse. Buddy had wandered, been abandoned, feared, and mislabeled as dangerous. But he was alive. He had carried the memories of that day like invisible scars, just as Daniel had carried the pain of losing him. And now, years later, the tag had led him straight back to the man who had never stopped looking for him, even in memory. But the reunion was far from simple. Daniel's mind raced as he traced the tag again. There were rules, protocols, policies that could prevent him from taking Buddy home immediately. He could adopt the dog, yes, but only after evaluations, paperwork, and the approval of several supervisors. And Buddy wasn't just any dog. He was a trained search and rescue K9. That meant federal regulations might apply, records would have to be verified, and someone would need to confirm his past assignments. Time, Daniel realized, was now the enemy. Every moment Buddy spent in the shelter was another moment of uncertainty, another moment of risk. He lowered his voice, speaking softly to Buddy. "I'm not letting them take you away. Not again." Buddy leaned into him, tail flicking nervously, his body trembling with a mixture of fear, recognition, and relief. Daniel felt the weight of the years they had both survived, of the trauma and separation that had stretched between them. He whispered again, "I've been looking for you for so long, Buddy. You're home now." At that moment, the shelter manager returned, holding the phone. Daniel could see the tension in her face. "Daniel, there's more," she said quietly. "We need to verify his history. Someone at Station 14 will have records, but it's going to take time." Daniel nodded, trying to steady his racing thoughts. He knew the procedures, he understood the bureaucracy, but every second Buddy spent here felt like a countdown. Then the phone rang again. Daniel's heart leapt. A voice he recognized instantly came through the receiver, a former captain from Station 14. The man's tone was calm, deliberate, and heavy with significance. "Daniel, we've confirmed it. Buddy survived. He's the same dog. Every record, every assignment, it matches." Daniel felt his knees buckle slightly. The confirmation was surreal. Buddy had survived the rubble, the chaos, the abandonment, and the world had assumed he was gone. Yet here he was, trembling but alive, pressing into Daniel's arms like he had never wanted to let go. But as the call continued, Daniel's heart sank slightly. The captain's voice revealed complications he hadn't anticipated. Buddy had been transferred multiple times after the incident, and some records had been lost, misfiled, or misinterpreted. There were reports of aggressive behavior, misunderstood incidents stemming from fear and trauma, not malice. Policies would have to be overridden, and Daniel would need to personally authorize and attest to Buddy's behavior. The reunion was miraculous, but not guaranteed to be permanent. Buddy's ears twitched as if sensing the weight of the news. He pressed closer, nuzzling Daniel's chest, tail flicking weakly but steadily. Daniel stroked his head, murmuring reassurances. "We'll get through this. You and I, we've survived worse." Buddy let out a soft, almost imperceptible whine, leaning into the warmth and familiarity of Daniel's touch. Lisa looked on, wiping a tear from her cheek. "He's special," she whispered. "I think everyone in this shelter has always known it, even if they didn't understand it. You two, you were meant to find each other again." Daniel nodded, but his focus remained sharp, aware that even with confirmation, obstacles remained. The bureaucracy, the adoption rules, the history of trauma, they were hurdles that could still separate them. Suddenly, Buddy's attention shifted. He lifted his head, ears pricked, eyes locked on the shelter door. His body stiffened. Something had changed. Daniel followed his gaze and saw a visitor at the entrance, someone unfamiliar, someone who hadn't been here before. Buddy let out a low growl, the first sound he had made in months. Daniel's heart skipped a beat. Who could it be? And why did Buddy react so strongly? The stranger moved closer, speaking softly, hands raised in a gesture of peace. Daniel instinctively stepped in front of Buddy, protective yet uncertain. The dog's tail stiffened, muscles tense, eyes darting between the man and Daniel. A wave of anxiety passed through Daniel. He had spent years protecting Buddy, yet here was a moment he could not control. The unknown presence carried weight, and the dog's instincts screamed that danger might be near, or that the past had returned in a form they couldn't yet understand. Daniel whispered into Buddy's ear, "It's okay. I'm here, we'll face it together." Buddy leaned slightly against him, still wary, still alert, still carrying the trauma of years spent misunderstood and abandoned. The stranger paused, eyes flicking between Daniel and Buddy, then nodded subtly before retreating toward the back of the shelter. But the moment had shaken both man and dog. The calm, miraculous reunion was now tinged with uncertainty. As Daniel held Buddy close, the weight of the day settled over him. The tag had been the key, the bridge between past and present. It had unlocked recognition, it had revealed survival, and it had led him to the dog he thought he had lost forever. But it had also opened a door to the unknown, to challenges that remained unresolved. Daniel stroked Buddy's head gently, whispering promises he intended to keep. "We'll get through this. Nothing will take you away from me again." Buddy leaned into him, trembling slightly but trusting, letting out a soft sigh that spoke of relief, recognition, and tentative hope. Outside, the winter sun dipped lower, casting long shadows across the shelter floor. The glint of Buddy's worn tag caught the fatting light once more, a symbol of survival, of fate, and of the bond that refused to be broken. But as the shadows lengthened, the air seemed to thrum with anticipation. Something else, something unseen, was waiting, just beyond the edge of understanding. And in that charged silence, Daniel and Buddy remained entwined, hearts beating in sync, eyes locked, bracing for whatever would come next. Because the tag had revealed the truth, but the story was far from over. The past had a way of catching up, and the future was about to demand a choice that neither man nor dog could ignore. And somewhere in the back of the shelter, a phone continued to ring, a whisper of urgency that promised the next chapter would not be gentle. Monday morning arrived with the faint hum of a new beginning, yet tension crackled through the Ohio shelter like static electricity. Daniel Harper returned early, determined not to leave Buddy's side. The large mixed-breed dog had slept at the shelter overnight, his body pressed against the corner of the cage, eyes bright but wary. Every movement from the staff, every creak of the floorboards made him flinch. Daniel crouched beside him, hand on his back, whispering, "It's just us, Buddy. Nobody's taking you from me today." Buddy leaned into him, trembling with a mix of fear, anticipation, and something older, recognition. The process of reclaiming Buddy was more complicated than Daniel had imagined. Despite the undeniable reunion, the shelter had policies that could not be bypassed lightly. Buddy's file contained a history of bite incidents, misunderstood moments of panic, not aggression, but the policies didn't distinguish subtlety. Daniel understood that trauma was invisible, and Buddy had carried years of it. He also understood that the tag was more than a relic. It was the key to proving that Buddy was not just a random dog, but a trained search and rescue partner whose past service demanded respect and protection. Daniel approached the front desk and began the necessary paperwork. Staff members hovered, offering quiet encouragement, but the room felt heavy with uncertainty. Lisa, standing nearby, whispered, "He knows you're here, he trusts you. That's already half the battle." Daniel smiled faintly, though his jaw tightened with anxiety. He had spent years relying on instinct, on experience, on memory, and now every shred of that knowledge was being tested against bureaucracy and policy. As Daniel completed the adoption forms, Buddy's attention shifted constantly. He paced inside his cage, muscles taut, ears flicking at every sound. A sudden squeak from a nearby puppy made him flinch violently, a reflex born of fear and long months of neglect. Daniel reached through the cage, steadying him with gentle pressure. "It's okay, Buddy. I'm here. Nothing's going to hurt you now," he murmured. The dog pressed closer, leaning into the reassurance, tail flicking hesitantly, eyes wide but trusting. Finally, the shelter manager returned, file in hand, a serious expression etched across her face. "Daniel, we've verified most of the records," she said. "Station 14 confirms Buddy's K9 history, but there are gaps. Several assignments were not logged properly after the collapse, and some reports of aggression must be reviewed before full adoption approval can be granted." Daniel's chest tightened. He had anticipated hurdles, but now they were tangible, looming obstacles that could delay or even prevent the reunion he had dreamed of for years. Daniel exhaled slowly, keeping his focus on Buddy. "I understand," he said firmly. "I'll take responsibility, I'll provide references, I'll do whatever it takes, but I'm not leaving without him. He's coming home with me today." His voice carried a quiet authority, one forged through years of emergency work and decisive action. Buddy responded instantly, ears perking, tail flicking slightly, body relaxing into Daniel's presence. Recognition alone had become a lifeline, a tether that anchored Buddy to the hope of a safe future. The manager hesitated, then nodded. "We'll make calls. If everything checks out, you can take him, but we'll need to observe him in a controlled environment first, just to be safe." Daniel agreed without argument. The controlled observation was procedural, necessary, but to him, it was a mere formality. What mattered was that Buddy had recognized him, and he had recognized Buddy. Years of loss and longing were converging in this small, fluorescent-lit room. As the staff prepared the observation area, Buddy's tension rose again. He paced inside his cage, body stiff, eyes darting to every corner, every shadow, every visitor. Daniel followed him closely, crouching to keep their eyes level. "I know it's scary," he whispered. "I won't let anyone hurt you. Not again. We'll get through this together." The dog leaned into him, a subtle but significant act of trust, yet the tremor in his legs reminded Daniel of the fragility of trauma. The observation period began. Buddy was led into a small room, neutral, empty of distractions, except for Daniel and a shelter volunteer who would take notes. Buddy's body remained stiff, every muscle coiled for reaction. A sudden movement, a chair scraping against the floor, made him jump, a sharp whine escaping his throat. Daniel immediately knelt, hand on the dog's neck, murmuring reassurances. "It's okay, Buddy. I'm not going anywhere." Slowly, Buddy's muscles began to relax, tail flicking, ears gradually lowering. Recognition of safety was replacing instinctive fear. Hours passed in tense observation. Buddy responded only to Daniel, ignoring the volunteers' attempts to coax him with treats or toys. He walked at Daniel's pace, followed him wherever he went, and allowed Daniel to stroke and guide him without resistance. It was clear. The bond between them was unbreakable. Every instinct Daniel had, every memory of working alongside Buddy in the field, was mirrored in the dog's responses. He was not just compliant, he was reunited. Yet just as Daniel began to feel relief, a new obstacle appeared. A loud bark from another dog outside the room triggered a sudden reaction from Buddy. He leapt back, teeth bared, hackles raised, his old instincts responding to perceived danger. Daniel's heart leapt. He recognized the trigger immediately. Noise and surprise, the very stimuli that had caused previous incidents labeled as aggression. He knelt low, speaking in a calm, steady voice, holding out his hand. "It's okay, Buddy, it's me. Nothing's happening. I've got you." Slowly, Buddy's body relaxed again, the growl fading into a low whine. The shelter staff exchanged glances. The behavior was textbook trauma, a response anyone familiar with K9 recovery would recognize, but policy dictated caution. Daniel's mind raced. Every obstacle he had faced in the past, collapsed buildings, smoke, lives in peril, was nothing compared to this bureaucratic challenge. He had to advocate for Buddy, to argue against protocol, to convince them that this dog's history of trauma was not aggression, and that the bond between them was a crucial part of his rehabilitation. Finally, the observation period concluded. The staff gathered to discuss findings. Every volunteer present agreed. Buddy's behavior was consistent with trauma responses, not aggression. Every movement was directed toward Daniel, every sign of fear mitigated by his presence. The evidence was clear. This was not a dog to be abandoned, feared, or dismissed. This was a dog who had survived unimaginable circumstances, who had retained loyalty and recognition across years of separation, and who needed the one person who could understand him. Daniel's hands remained on Buddy's collar. He whispered, "We're almost there, Buddy. Almost home." Buddy leaned in, pressing his body close, trembling with a mixture of relief and uncertainty. The tension in the room was thick. The final approval rested with the manager, who reviewed the files one last time, making phone calls to verify records and approvals. Every tick of the clock felt like an eternity. Then a phone call came through that made Daniel freeze. It was a voice he hadn't expected, a former captain from Station 14, the man who had overseen Buddy during the collapse years ago. He had additional details, records that had been lost in filing chaos, and a warning. Buddy's past assignments included exposure to highly stressful rescue operations, and the dog's reactions could still be triggered in certain environments. Full adoption would require not only approval, but also a demonstration of understanding of Buddy's triggers and needs. Daniel's heart pounded. Every protective instinct screamed to secure Buddy immediately. Every logical thought reminded him that trauma had consequences, that this dog was not a simple pet, but a survivor of disaster. He met Buddy's eyes, whispered reassurances, and promised silently, no matter what, they would navigate this together. Buddy's body pressed closer, tail flicking weakly, eyes wide with trust, as if understanding that the struggle to reclaim him was part of their reunion. The manager returned, placing her hand lightly on Daniel's shoulder. "Everything is verified. You have the authority to take Buddy home today." Relief flooded Daniel, but it was tempered by the awareness that Buddy's healing had only just begun. He looked down at the dog, tears brimming. "We're going home, Buddy. No one can separate us again." Buddy pressed closer, trembling with exhaustion and joy, eyes glistening, and for the first time in years he allowed himself to fully relax. Yet as they prepared to leave, Buddy paused, ears twitching. He stared down the hallway, body stiffening once more, tail low but alert. Something unseen, some residue of his past trauma, lingered in the air, a whisper of danger, a memory triggered by shadows or sound. Daniel noticed instantly, hand tightening on the leash. The road ahead would not be easy. The world outside the shelter might be unfamiliar, and Buddy's past experiences would not vanish with paperwork or permission. As they stepped toward the exit, the winter sunlight casting long shadows across the concrete floor, Daniel whispered, "We'll face it together. Nothing will stop us now." Buddy leaned into him, steady but tense, aware that life beyond the shelter was uncertain, full of challenges, yet anchored by the presence of the man who had never stopped looking for him. Outside, the wind whispered against the building, carrying the faint echo of past rescues and long-forgotten calls. The glint of Buddy's worn tag caught the light once more, a symbol of survival, loyalty, and fate's intricate weaving. And though their path ahead was uncertain, one thing was undeniable: Daniel and Buddy had found each other again. Nothing could erase that. But just as they reached the parking lot, a shadow moved across the edge of the lot, something unexpected, something that hinted the past had not finished with Buddy, and that the challenges ahead were only beginning. The calm of reunion hung in the air, fragile and precious, waiting to be tested. The chill of the December air bit at Daniel's cheeks as he stepped out of the shelter with Buddy by his side. The dog's paws crunched on the thin layer of frost covering the parking lot, each step tentative yet deliberate. Daniel held the leash loosely at first, letting Buddy choose the pace, speaking softly. "It's okay, Buddy. Outside is safe now. We're together." Buddy's ears flicked nervously, tail low, but he stayed close, leaning into Daniel's leg as if the man himself was a shield against the unknown. The ride home in Daniel's old pickup was quiet, save for the soft sound of Buddy's breathing and the hum of the engine. Daniel kept one hand on the wheel and the other resting gently on Buddy's back, feeling the warmth beneath his fingers. Months, or maybe years, of trauma and uncertainty had left Buddy tense, his muscles rigid even in moments of calm. Daniel understood that trust had to be earned anew every day, and he was ready to give it. Their house, a modest brick home on a quiet street, had been prepared for Buddy's arrival. Blankets were laid on the floor, food and water bowls were set, and a few toys, soft, worn, safe, were scattered in the living room. Daniel opened the door and stepped inside first, letting Buddy follow. The dog hesitated at the threshold, sniffing cautiously, tail twitching. Daniel knelt down, whispering, "Go on, Buddy. You're safe here." Slowly, Buddy stepped in, paws tentative, nose to the ground, sniffing every corner, every shadow, as if assessing a world he hadn't known existed for years. The first few hours were a delicate dance. Buddy explored cautiously, occasionally pausing to flinch at sudden noises, a creak from the floorboards, the rustle of a curtain, the distant hum of traffic. Daniel followed him closely, murmuring reassurances. "It's okay, Buddy. Nothing's happening. I've got you." Buddy leaned into the sound of Daniel's voice, body relaxing slightly each time, yet the tension never fully left him. The dog was alive, safe, and yet still carrying the weight of every frightening memory that had ever been inflicted upon him. By late afternoon, Buddy had settled near the fireplace, curling into a ball on a blanket Daniel had placed for him. Daniel sat nearby, watching, letting the dog rest while he filled out the last forms for official adoption and K-9 record transfer. His phone buzzed intermittently with calls from Station 14 and shelter staff, all confirming details, all emphasizing safety protocols and past incidents. Daniel ignored most of it, focusing instead on Buddy, who lifted his head now and then to glance at him, ears twitching but eyes softening. The quiet of the evening was shattered by a sudden noise, a car backfiring outside, loud and unexpected. Buddy leapt to his feet, hackles raised, ears pinned. His growl was low and threatening, tail stiff. Daniel's heart raced. This was the moment he had feared, a trauma trigger that could undo months of careful reassurance in seconds. "Buddy," he whispered, voice firm but calm. "It's me. Nothing's happening. I'm right here." The dog froze, muscles taut, eyes scanning the room for danger. Daniel slowly approached, crouching, holding his hand out for comfort. After tense moments, Buddy's body began to relax, though his tail remained low. He nuzzled Daniel's hand cautiously, seeking reassurance. It was a small victory, but it reminded Daniel that healing would be gradual. He whispered softly, "You're safe now, Buddy. I won't let anything hurt you again." The dog leaned against him, trembling, but trust had returned, even if only partially. Dinner time brought its own challenges. Buddy sniffed cautiously at the bowl Daniel placed on the floor, ears twitching at every sound. He ate slowly, meticulously, as if testing the safety of the environment bite by bite. Daniel watched closely, marveling at the patience and caution that Buddy exhibited. After all the rejection, all the trauma, all the years spent misunderstood, this dog was learning to trust life again, and Daniel was the anchor. Later that evening, Daniel settled into the armchair with a blanket and a cup of coffee. Buddy had moved closer, lying partially across Daniel's lap, eyes half closed but alert. The dog's body still carried tension, but each breath seemed a little more relaxed than the last. Daniel stroked his fur gently, murmuring, "We'll get through this together, I promise." Buddy let out a soft sigh, the kind that spoke of tentative relief and fragile hope. Just as Daniel began to relax, a knock came at the door. Both man and dog froze. Buddy's ears twitched, tail stiffened. Daniel's pulse quickened. He stood, moving toward the door cautiously. "It's probably just a neighbor," he whispered, though his voice carried an edge of doubt. Buddy stayed close, muscles coiled, eyes fixed on the entrance. The knock repeated, louder this time, urgent. Daniel's hand went to the doorknob, hesitating. When he opened the door, no one was there. Only a small envelope lay on the doorstep, edges slightly worn, handwriting unfamiliar. Buddy growled softly, moving to stand in front of Daniel, body tense. Daniel bent down, picking up the envelope carefully. The handwriting was formal, almost bureaucratic, yet chilling in its precision. He opened it slowly. Inside was a single sheet of paper. Attention! Buddy's previous assignments require immediate review. Due to his history of exposure to high-risk rescue operations, any civilian interaction must be reported and supervised. Failure to comply may result in temporary removal for observation and reassignment. Compliance is mandatory. Daniel's stomach dropped. The reunion, miraculous as it was, came with strings he hadn't anticipated. Buddy's past was not finished with him. The policies that had once endangered him in shelters now threatened his freedom even at home. Buddy pressed against Daniel's leg, sensing the tension, ears flicking nervously. Daniel whispered firmly, "We're not going anywhere, Buddy. Not today. Not ever." He quickly realized that the fight wasn't over. Buddy's trauma, the bureaucracy, and the shadows of past danger would continue to challenge them. But Daniel also knew this. He had his partner back. The dog who had survived rejection, fear, and abandonment was finally safe in his arms, and he would not let history repeat itself. That night, Buddy slept at Daniel's feet, body tense at first, then gradually relaxing into the warmth of the home. Daniel watched over him, feeling a mix of relief, fear, and anticipation. The road ahead was uncertain. Triggers, bureaucracy, and the weight of past trauma loomed over them, but the bond was unbreakable. As the house settled into silence, Buddy's ears twitched again, sensing something Daniel could not see. Outside, a shadow moved along the edge of the property, subtle, almost imperceptible, yet enough to make both man and dog alert. Daniel's hand tightened slightly on Buddy's collar. "Whatever it is, we face it together," he whispered. Buddy's tail flicked in agreement, body tense but loyal. The night stretched long, filled with unspoken questions. Who was monitoring Buddy? Was it simply bureaucracy or something more? And how much of the past would continue to haunt them? Daniel realized that survival had brought them together, but true freedom would require facing not only Buddy's trauma, but also unseen forces that might yet test the limits of their bond. And somewhere, just beyond the edge of the home, the world was already stirring, waiting to see if the dog that no one wanted, and the man who never stopped searching, would survive the next challenge. The glint of Buddy's worn tag caught the moonlight through the window, a silent reminder of resilience, recognition, and the fragile thread of fate that had brought them together. But even in the quiet, Daniel knew one thing: the story wasn't over. The past had a way of catching up, and Buddy's journey toward true safety and peace had only just begun. A week had passed since Buddy's return home. The dog had begun to settle into the rhythms of the house, though every creak of the floorboards and every passing car set his ears twitching. Daniel remained patient, letting Buddy dictate the pace of their newfound life. Walks were slow, measured, cautious. Every noise, every shadow, every sudden movement was a potential trigger. But each time, Buddy relied on Daniel, leaning into his presence, testing trust in small increments. That Saturday, Daniel decided it was time for their first real outing beyond the safety of the yard. The local park, a few blocks away, had wide open spaces, trees, and distant sounds of children playing, enough to test Buddy without overwhelming him. Daniel clipped the leash to Buddy's collar, murmuring, "We'll take it slow, Buddy. No rush." Buddy pressed close at first, paws hesitant, tail low. But the familiar warmth of Daniel's hand along his back gave him courage. They walked slowly down the quiet suburban street, Buddy sniffing cautiously at every tree, every lamppost, every discarded paper on the ground. His body remained tense, muscles coiled like springs, but he did not pull away. Daniel spoke softly, praising each tentative step. "Good boy, Buddy. You're safe. You're doing great." Buddy's ears flicked at the sound of his name, and a faint wag of the tail betrayed recognition and reassurance. The park came into view, sun glinting off frost-covered grass. Daniel released the leash slightly, giving Buddy space to explore while maintaining control. At first, Buddy walked slowly, circling, sniffing cautiously, alert to every sound. Children's laughter drifted from a distance, and he froze, body stiffening, hackles rising. Daniel crouched beside him, hand on the dog's neck. "It's okay, Buddy, you're safe, I'm right here." Buddy leaned into him, trembling slightly, but allowed Daniel to guide him forward. They had almost reached the center of the park when a sudden noise shattered the calm. A cyclist swerved sharply, ringing his bell as he passed close to Buddy. The dog's eyes widened, hackles shot up, and he lunged forward, barking fiercely, muscles taut, ready to react to what he perceived as danger. Daniel's heart raced. This was the moment he had feared, the trigger that could undo weeks of careful progress. "Buddy," Daniel's voice cut through the chaos, firm but calm. He planted himself between the dog and the cyclist, holding the leash tightly. Buddy froze, ears swiveling, body stiff, gaze locked on Daniel. Slowly, Daniel kneeled, holding out his hand in a gesture of calm authority. "It's me. Nothing's happening. I've got you. I'm not going anywhere." The dog's body quivered, tail flicking, then gradually relaxed slightly. Recognition was winning over instinct. The cyclist, startled, slowed and waved apologetically. Daniel nodded, murmuring reassurances, then focused back on Buddy. The dog's breathing remained rapid, muscles still coiled, but he did not pull away. Daniel whispered, "Good boy, Buddy. You trusted me. That's what matters." Buddy pressed closer, ears flicking nervously, eyes glistening with an unspoken mixture of fear and relief. They continued deeper into the park, walking slowly past benches, trees, and open fields. Each step was a negotiation, each glance a subtle conversation between man and dog. Buddy occasionally flinched at distant noises, dogs barking, leaves rustling, but Daniel remained a constant anchor. "We face it together," he murmured. "Nothing can hurt you as long as I'm here." Buddy's head rested against Daniel's leg, body tense but leaning into trust, a fragile truce with the world outside the home. Then, just as Daniel began to feel a cautious optimism, a small child ran past, chasing a ball, screaming with delight. Buddy froze, hackles raised, teeth bared slightly, tail stiff. The dog's body was coiled, ready to spring, instincts from years of trauma and mislabeling screaming warnings. Daniel's pulse quickened. He could see the potential for disaster, not just for the child, but for the fragile trust they had been building. "Buddy," Daniel said firmly, kneeling low, eyes locked on the dog. "It's okay. It's me. You know me. Nothing's going to happen. I've got you." Slowly, he extended a hand, letting Buddy sniff and feel reassurance in a tangible way. The dog's muscles began to relax incrementally, tail lowering slightly, ears shifting back, but he did not yet move forward. Trust had been tested, and Buddy knew Daniel would not abandon him. The child's ball bounced toward them, startling Buddy again. Daniel remained steady, holding the leash firmly, speaking calmly. "We're okay, we're safe. Watch me." Buddy followed his gaze, observing Daniel's composed demeanor. Gradually, the tension in his body eased, tail flicking tentatively. Recognition and trust overcame the instinctive fear. Daniel exhaled slowly. This was progress, the first real demonstration that Buddy could navigate the world beyond home with him as anchor. They walked to a quiet corner of the park, away from the main playground, and Daniel let Buddy off the leash briefly. Buddy sniffed, circled, and explored cautiously, but always returned to Daniel's side. The connection between them was evident, mutual reliance forged in past trauma and present care. Daniel knelt, brushing his hand along Buddy's back, murmuring reassurances. Buddy leaned fully against him, eyes softening, body still tense but accepting comfort. The sun dipped lower in the sky, casting long shadows across the frosted grass. Daniel and Buddy sat together on a bench, dog resting his head on Daniel's knee. The ordeal of the park outing had been a test, not just of Buddy's trust in the world, but of his trust in Daniel. And though Buddy's body still carried tension, the bond between them had been validated, strengthened by the challenge. But the victory was fragile. As the shadows lengthened, Daniel noticed a figure at the far edge of the park, a man standing still, watching them. There was no movement, no approach, just observation. Buddy's ears pricked, tail stiffened slightly, and he growled low in his throat. Daniel's pulse quickened. Who was watching them? Was it a neighbor, a passerby, or someone connected to Buddy's past? The uncertainty tightened like a vice around his chest. He stood, leash in hand, and moved cautiously toward the figure. Buddy followed, body tense but alert, trusting Daniel's guidance. As they approached, the figure turned and walked away quickly, disappearing behind trees. Daniel scanned the area, but it was too late. The moment had passed. Yet the unease lingered. Buddy's trauma might have been partially healed, but the world still held threats, visible and invisible. Daniel crouched beside Buddy, brushing his hand along the dog's side. "It's okay, Buddy. It's just someone walking by. You're safe. I'm not letting anything happen to you." Buddy leaned into him, muscles relaxing fractionally, but the instinctive tension remained, a reminder that recovery was ongoing. Daniel realized that trust, though regained, had to be continuously earned and reinforced. As they walked home, the sun fully set, casting long shadows along the quiet streets. Buddy's steps were slower now, tentative but steady, body leaning against Daniel whenever possible. Each passing car, each distant sound, each unexpected movement was a minor challenge, a test of trust and resilience. Daniel spoke softly, continuously, providing anchor points, reassurance, and guidance. Buddy's eyes flicked to him constantly, reading his posture, tone, and intent. By the time they reached home, Buddy's body was tired but calmer. Daniel prepared food, set out a warm blanket by the fireplace, and let the dog settle in. Buddy curled up, head resting on the blanket, eyes closing briefly. Daniel watched him, knowing the day had been a pivotal step in their shared recovery. Trust had been tested and partially strengthened. Fear had been confronted and survived. Yet as the night deepened, Daniel couldn't shake the feeling that the shadow in the park was only the beginning. Buddy's past, fraught with danger, abandonment, and trauma, would continue to present challenges. Each outing, each unexpected sound, each unfamiliar figure could become a test, sometimes subtle, sometimes stark. And the world beyond their home, unpredictable and uncontrolled, was full of potential triggers waiting to surface. Daniel sat in the armchair, Buddy resting at his feet, leash in hand, eyes scanning the darkened room. He whispered, "We'll face it together. Nothing will separate us again." Buddy let out a soft sigh, tail flicking once, body tense but compliant. Trust had been tested. Survival had been confirmed. And though the shadows of the past lingered, the bond between man and dog had emerged stronger, unbreakable, and ready to face whatever the future might hold. Outside, the wind rustled through the trees, carrying the faint echo of footsteps long past and memories yet to resurface. Daniel knew their journey was far from over. But for the first time in years, Buddy was home, and Daniel had his partner back. And somewhere beyond the quiet streets, an unseen observer made a note, leaving a trace of tension that promised the story was far from complete. The following morning, sunlight spilled through the living room windows, illuminating the dust motes that danced lazily in the air. Buddy stirred on his blanket, lifting his head and blinking at the brightness. For the first time in months, perhaps years, he did so without immediate tension or panic. Daniel, sitting nearby with a mug of coffee, watched him carefully. This was the moment he had been waiting for, a morning unhurried by the chaos of shelters, the weight of bureaucracy, or the shadows of past trauma. Yet Daniel knew better than to assume peace would come easily. The quiet was soon broken by the distant sound of a child laughing from the neighbor's yard. Buddy stiffened at first, ears flicking back, body tense. Daniel's hand moved immediately to rest on his back. "It's okay, Buddy. Remember, we're safe here. I'm right here with you." The dog exhaled slowly, muscles loosening, and pressed against Daniel's side. Trust had been tested repeatedly over the past week. Today would be no different, but each small step had reinforced the bond between them. Daniel decided it was time to reintroduce Buddy to the wider world. They would begin cautiously, taking a walk down their familiar street, testing reactions to sounds, movements, and interactions. As he clipped the leash onto Buddy's collar, he whispered, "We've made it this far, you're ready. I'll be right here every step of the way." Buddy responded with a slight wag of the tail, ears pricked forward, muscles relaxed but alert. This was progress, a quiet acknowledgement that life outside the home could be navigable with Daniel as an anchor. They walked slowly, side by side, Buddy's steps tentative but measured. Neighbors passed by, some stopping to greet Daniel, some nodding at the dog. Buddy responded cautiously at first, head lowered, body tense, but each reassuring word from Daniel helped him relax. He sniffed lampposts, grass edges, and the occasional tree, his nose twitching as he cataloged every new scent. The leash allowed Daniel to guide him, offering both security and freedom, a delicate balance Buddy had never experienced before. Suddenly, a car backfired from a side street. Buddy froze instantly, hackles rising, tail stiff. Daniel's heart clenched, but he remained calm, crouching and extending a hand. "It's okay, Buddy, it's me. Nothing's happening, I've got you." The dog's muscles quivered, ears flicking, but he did not bolt. Slowly, recognition and trust began to override fear. Buddy pressed closer, leaning into Daniel's guidance, a silent agreement that no matter the world's chaos, Daniel would remain his constant. As they continued down the street, a neighbor's child ran past, ball bouncing, laughter echoing. Buddy stiffened again, hackles rising, but Daniel's steady presence calmed him. "It's all right, Buddy. Watch me. Nothing will hurt you." The dog's eyes tracked Daniel, then relaxed slightly, tail flicking in cautious recognition. For the first time, Buddy was navigating real-world stimuli without retreating entirely into fear, a monumental milestone. Back at home, Daniel set out a familiar routine: food, water, grooming, and rest. Buddy ate calmly, no hesitation, no fear. Daniel watched him carefully, marveling at the resilience of the dog he had reclaimed from a world that had rejected him. Each step, each cautious sniff, each tentative wag of the tail was evidence of healing and progress. Buddy's journey from abandoned, fearful shelter dog to trusted partner was nearly complete, but one final challenge remained: fully confronting the past that had shaped him. That evening, Daniel decided to revisit the shelter, not to reclaim Buddy, but to close the chapter. The shelter had been the place of rejection, trauma, and uncertainty, but it had also been the place of recognition, the moment of reunion. He wanted Buddy to face it one last time on his terms. They drove quietly, Buddy alert but calm, muscles relaxed under Daniel's guidance. The shelter doors loomed ahead, fluorescent lights brightening the dusk. Volunteers looked up, awe and curiosity in their eyes as Buddy stepped inside confidently, leash held firmly by Daniel. Inside, Buddy paused briefly at the entrance, ears flicking, muscles coiled for reaction. Daniel knelt beside him, hand steadying the collar. "It's okay, Buddy, this is us. Nothing can hurt us here, we're together." Buddy exhaled slowly, body relaxing, tail flicking slightly. They moved through the hallways, past cages of dogs who had once been companions, witnesses to Buddy's struggle, observers of his resilience. Volunteers murmured softly, watching the transformation unfold. A dog who had once been rejected now walking proudly with the man who had never stopped searching. Daniel guided Buddy to the observation room, the place where their reunion had begun. The dog hesitated briefly, sniffing, muscles coiled, but recognition overrode hesitation. He pressed close to Daniel, leaning into trust. Daniel knelt beside him, whispering, "This is part of your past, Buddy. We've faced it. You're safe. We're safe." Buddy's body relaxed fully for the first time in years, head resting on Daniel's knee, eyes soft, tail flicking gently. Volunteers and staff watched in silent awe. They had witnessed miracles before, but never a bond like this, one forged through trauma, loss, and unwavering loyalty. Buddy's past assignments, his rejection by families, the bureaucratic obstacles, all were dwarfed by the simple, undeniable truth: he and Daniel belonged together. The dog who had survived fire, collapse, neglect, and abandonment had found his forever home. As they left the shelter, the sun had set, casting long shadows across the parking lot. Daniel glanced down at Buddy, who walked steadily beside him, tail wagging softly. "We did it, Buddy. You're finally home." The dog responded with a small whine of contentment, pressing against Daniel's leg. The leash was no longer a restraint, but a symbol of connection, guidance, and mutual trust. Back at home, Daniel prepared a space by the fireplace. Blankets were arranged, toys placed strategically, and food and water set in familiar spots. Buddy explored briefly, sniffing each item, then settled onto the main blanket, curling into a comfortable ball. Daniel knelt beside him, brushing a hand along his back. "This is your home now, Buddy. Forever." The dog exhaled softly, eyes closing, body relaxing completely. The trauma of years remained, but trust had been cemented, and safety was absolute. That night Daniel sat beside the fireplace, Buddy resting at his feet. The air was quiet, filled only with the soft crackle of the fire. He reflected on the journey, the shelters, the bureaucracy, the trauma, the rejection, the reunion. Each challenge had tested their bond, each obstacle had reinforced their resilience. And now, finally, they could face the future together, unbroken. Yet in the quiet, Daniel remained vigilant. Buddy's past had shaped him. Triggers would appear unpredictably, shadows of fear would surface, and the world beyond the home remained uncertain. But Daniel knew one truth above all: together they could face anything. Buddy's tag, worn and faded, glinted softly in the firelight, a symbol of survival, loyalty, and the unbreakable bond between man and dog. The next morning, Buddy woke without tension, stretching and yawning, tail flicking gently. Daniel filled the bowls with food and water, letting Buddy eat at his own pace. Then, for the first time, they ventured further afield, a nearby trail through the woods. Buddy's steps were tentative but confident, muscles relaxed under Daniel's steady guidance. Birds chirped, wind rustled through the trees, and Buddy responded with calm curiosity rather than instinctive fear. As they walked, Daniel reflected on the magnitude of what they had accomplished. Buddy had survived rejection, trauma, and abandonment. Daniel had survived grief, loneliness, and years of longing. Together, they had found a path forward, a bond unbroken by distance, time, or circumstance. The world remained unpredictable, yes, but within the circle of trust they had built, Buddy had finally found safety, love, and purpose. That evening, as Daniel watched Buddy curl up beside the fireplace, he whispered, "We made it, Buddy. We're home, forever." The dog exhaled softly, eyes closing, tail flicking in contentment. Outside, the wind carried faint echoes of the past, but inside, the bond was unshakable. The journey had been long, the tests relentless, but at last, man and dog were truly together, safe from the world and each other's fears. And somewhere in the quiet of the night, the worn tag glinted one final time, proof of survival, recognition, and the enduring power of loyalty. Buddy had finally found his place. Daniel had finally found his partner, and the world for now could wait.